The imposing silhouette of Hagia Sophia has looked down for almost 15 centuries over the old city of Istanbul, formerly the legendary city of Constantinople, and the crossroads between Europe and Asia. It's one of the most impressive monuments ever constructed by man. Built in the 6th century, its 56-meter-high dome was a huge challenge in terms of weight and was intended to last for centuries to come. Its cupolas and minarets identify it as a place of Muslim worship, yet it was constructed by Christians almost a century before the birth of Islam, and over 1,000 years separate its architecture from the other mosques in Istanbul, whose design was based on Hagia Sophia. Inside, it's like a gigantic cathedral. But on its walls, splendid Islamic calligraphy sits side by side with some of the greatest mosaics of the Byzantine era. The name Hagia Sophia comes from the Greek for divine wisdom. It's now a museum, and millions of visitors come from around the world to discover the remarkable history to which this place bears testimony.
It has been a cathedral for the Orthodox, for the Roman Catholics. It has been a mosque. It has been a symbol of the secular Turkish Republic, and it has been a magnificent architectural work.
The fact that this unique building and the wonders it contains have survived to this day is miraculous. Istanbul is built on a very active seismic fault line, and in its lifetime, Hagia Sophia has withstood dozens of earthquakes. It seems to have weathered them well, but its structural soundness remains a big unknown.
If an earthquake comes in the future strong enough, I think there is a real chance it can receive damage.
A major restoration campaign is underway, and a team of architects, seismologists, and engineers is trying to identify the weak points of the building in order to take any necessary action to save it. Hagia Sophia remains an eminently symbolic monument. The entire history of this part of the world is contained within its walls, and there may still be some undiscovered treasures within. Robert Oosterhout teaches history of art at the University of Pennsylvania. He's a specialist in monumental Byzantine architecture, and for him, Hagia Sophia is an exceptional construction, both in terms of its uniqueness and its size.
Well, Hagia Sophia was really designed to be a unique building, and it has remained a unique building through its history. No one with a practical background would ever attempt anything like Hagia Sophia. This is the beauty of the building, that the architecture was innovative and on a monumental scale. Nothing close to this had ever been built before.
15 centuries later, the magic of this architecture continues to work as it did on the first day of its creation.
One of the great beauties of Hagia Sophia is we can still experience the interior of the building much as a Byzantine spectator would have seen it in the 6th century. We experience the weightless quality of the building. We see the dome almost as if it's floating on a ring of light. We understand the interior of the building as an experience that's completely different from anything else on Earth.
But for how much longer will visitors be able to enjoy this unique experience?
Maintaining a building the scale of Hagia Sophia has been a problem since the 6th century. For much of its history, it was a white elephant. And there are periods where it actually was not used on a regular basis simply because it was so expensive to maintain.
Today, a huge conservation effort is once again underway, requiring the biggest scaffolding structure ever to be constructed inside it, to consolidate the walls of Hagia Sophia and return them to their former glory. But is the monument still able to withstand the earthquakes that regularly hit the region? In 1992, 2 quakes of a magnitude of 7.6 brought down hundreds of buildings in the city and resulted in 17,000 deaths. And specialists warn that another major event is likely sometime in the next 2 decades. Eza Çakti is the head of the laboratory of seismic study at Boğaziçi University. Her task is to evaluate the current state of Hagia Sophia and how earthquake-proof it really is.
Ve yapıldığı andan itibaren aslında bir sürü deformasyon olmaya başladı. Çünkü yani taştan yapıyorlar fakat artık...
She's here today to raise awareness among the students in her team of the unique behavior of this building and how it has deteriorated.
Did they not take any precautions for the deformations that they observed during the construction of the building?
When they saw that the pillars were deforming, they continued building up by fixing the deformed areas and reinforcing them. When it deformed, they reinforced. That's how they continued building up.
Some of the pillars are slanted, the others are straight. There is some sort of pressure on them.
One cannot understand the scale of this without being here. It's good that you guys are here to witness this.
However spectacular they may be, Eza Çakti isn't worried about these deformations. She's more concerned by the behavior of the main structure of Hagia Sophia. The giant dome and the arches supporting it are under close surveillance.
We have sensors for earthquake monitoring for about 20 years in this building.
1, 2, 3, and another one over there.
They measure and record vibrations full time. The data that we obtain from here is very important to us in terms of understanding the general structural behavior of this huge building.
This information is sent in real time to the Seismic Monitoring Center at Boğaziçi University. This is where all the data from dozens of sensors placed in Istanbul's major buildings is collated. There are 9 such sensors in Hagia Sophia.
We have 1 station on the ground level. We have 4 stations here at the top of the main load-carrying piers of the structure. Then we have 4 other sensors on the top, on the crowns of those main arches which support the main dome.
They've shown that during seismic activity, some parts of the building have been moving in a worrying way.
Our monitoring indicates 2 locations in the building which may have more excessive vibration. These are the top of the main arches on the east and west side. And also something is going on with the southwest pier.
These vibrations reveal potential fragility in the building structure.
Even though the structure doesn't appear to receive permanent damage as a result of 1999 earthquakes, it doesn't mean that it's earthquake-proof.
The building's behavior is so complex that Esa has decided to adopt an original approach in order to try and identify these weak points. She has reduced the building to the key elements in its structure and asked a team of specialist technicians to make a model of it in bricks and mortar. She will then simulate an earthquake on this scale model in the lab. The team has already carried out experiments like this on a model of a mosque in Macedonia, and it revealed the hidden weaknesses in the structure. However, the enormous dimensions of Hagia Sophia are presenting the technicians with a real problem in terms of scale.
I'm worried I won't even be able to build it. It might collapse during construction.
Well, there will be some challenges. In my opinion, we will face problems with during the construction of the arches and of the domes, and then in putting them in place, in making the model work as a homogeneous structure. So we will have those three critical issues.
The construction of Hagia Sophia in the 6th century was no doubt a message to the world, foretelling of a major event in the history of humanity. In the 3rd century, the Roman Empire dominated the Mediterranean basin, but was struggling to control this huge territory. In a final attempt to assert himself, Emperor Constantine I founded a second capital, a new Rome, on the site of a former Greek colony on the banks of the Bosphorus, Byzantium. It soon became known as Constantinople, the city of Constantine. The first Roman emperor to embrace Christianity, he built a basilica dedicated to divine wisdom. A century later, Christianity became the official religion of the empire. But the territory was divided into two: the Western Roman Empire with its capital in Ravenna, and the Eastern Roman Empire controlled from Constantinople. During the 5th century, the Western Empire collapsed under pressure from the barbarian tribes. The Eastern Roman Empire, now known as Byzantine, saw its influence really take off in the 6th century during the reign of Emperor Justinian. Justinian saw himself as the heir to the Roman Empire and God's representative on earth. But in Constantinople, such claims were not unanimously welcomed.
After Justinian became emperor, there were many challenges to his authority. The greatest came in 532, when riots broke out after a bad call at a chariot match at the Hippodrome. Justinian gathered the rebels together in the Hippodrome, seeming to agree to their demands, but instead he simply closed the doors and slaughtered them all. The army killed tens of thousands of rebels, and this consolidated Justinian's power. From that point on, his greatest challenge was to rebuild the city, where in the Nike riots, much of the urban fabric had been destroyed, including the Church of Hagia Sophia.
Justinian turned his capital, Constantinople, into the biggest city of the known world. And to mark his victory, he wanted to erect a monumental basilica on the ruins of the first St. Sophia. But what shape should he give to this monumental construction, destined to announce the birth of the first great Christian empire? Joan Branham teaches history of art in Providence in the US, and she has studied the development of religious architecture during the early days of Christianity in detail. She's here at San Giovanni, a church in Ravenna, Italy, whose plans date back to the 4th century.
In the 4th century, Christianity becomes legal, and so all of a sudden imperial funds are available for church building. But the question is, how does one then fabricate or conceive of a sacred space for early Christianity?
Greek and Roman temples were reserved for the gods, and worshippers had to remain outside. The Christians would decide to assemble their congregations in a covered space, using the model of a building conceived by the Romans as a place to mete out justice, the basilica.
The early Christian basilica is a large space, usually rectangular in shape. It has a central aisle that we call a nave, and sometimes 1 or 2 side aisles. And at one end of it, there is a hemispherical projection called an apse. And here is located the altar, around which a priestly class will officiate.
For his new basilica, Justinian wanted to use this rectangular shape now associated with the Christian faith. But the building also had to symbolize his imperial power. And to do that, he used another Roman model, the Dome of the Pantheon, which for centuries had embodied the power of Rome. Justinian wanted a concrete symbol of a completely new concept, the fusion of imperial and religious power. To give form to this vision, he called upon Anthemius of Tralles and Isidore of Miletus, a mathematical genius and a geometrical physicist from the Platonic Academy of Athens.
Anthemius and Isidorus were university professors. Now, if you were, let's say, ask me to design a building, you'd be getting yourself into a lot of trouble. I'm a university professor. I'm not a practicing architect.
Justinian gave these two men 100 master builders, 10,000 workers, and an unlimited budget.
The university professors set about doing something that was truly innovative. It wasn't the sort of building that a practical builder would ever attempt to build. There's nothing practical about Hagia Sophia. It's all innovation. They started with the concept of the dome over a square bay. That is, we have a square at the center that measures 100 Byzantine feet across, and a dome measuring 100 Byzantine feet across rising above that. That figure is expanded to the east and west by half domes. The half domes measure 50 feet in length. So I think we can understand the design of Hagia Sophia in terms of pure geometry. It's geometric flights of fancy beyond what a practical architect would ever attempt to build.
The first challenge of constructing this geometrical abstraction was how to support such a huge dome. The solution they adopted was to create a structure formed of 4 enormous Roman arches.
Nowhere are there arches as large as those in Hagia Sophia. Maybe the largest surviving Roman arch is 50 feet in diameter. The arches that support the Great Dome in Hagia Sophia are 100 feet in diameter. That is much, much larger than anything that had been attempted in Roman architecture before.
How could they be sure that these exceptionally large arches wouldn't collapse? In creating their scale model, Esa Chakti and her team are facing a similar problem. Like the builders of Hagia Sophia, the team is using wooden molds to guide and support the arrangement of bricks and mortar to make these 4 large arches.
The keystone is the last part and the most important part. It will complete the arches. When we put it there, it is making the necessary connection between 2 sides of the arches. It will take all the loads from up to the down side of the arches.
But a gigantic dome means a huge weight. Even in terms of a scale model, how will the arches be able to support it? To find out, Esa places sensors on top of the arches like those in the real Hagia Sophia. They will allow her to precisely measure how much stress the arch is under depending on the weight it's bearing. Then they add bags of sand to simulate the weight of the dome. Each bag weighs 25 kilos. According to the calculations made with their digital model, the arch ought to be able to hold around 15 bags before it deforms to the point of collapse. But when they add the 5th, luckily nobody's hurt, but the arch collapses under a load of barely 100 kilos. Reducing structures such as this sometimes leads to surprises. The team is disappointed, but for Esa, this type of incident proves how useful such experiments are.
It is always interesting to see the failure mechanism in real life. When you do it on computers, you develop an idea of how the failure is going to happen. But it is only during the tests of this kind or after damages during a real earthquake where we see the pattern, the damage pattern or the collapse pattern.
Watching in slow motion shows how the weight of the bags exerts a lateral force on the arches and deforms them until they collapse. In the real building, the weight of the dome exerts a similar force towards the exterior. To counter these forces, Anthemius and Isidore strengthen their arches on the east-west axis, with gigantic buttresses on the exterior of the building. On the north-south axis, they adopted a different solution: semi-domes. They perform the same role as the buttresses, strengthening the resistance of the arches. And this innovation also meant they could open up the inside and create a huge rectangular space, offering visitors a spectacular view of the dome. There was still one more problem to resolve: how to seat the circular base of the dome on the square shape defined by the 4 arches. 4 curved triangles known as pendentives were inserted in each corner to complete the structure and create a harmonious transition from the circle to the square. As with the arches, these pendentives weren't the first of their kind, but they were the biggest ever seen. Justinian's wish was magnificently fulfilled: an exceptional dome that was both light and majestic, topping the rectangular shape of a Christian basilica of staggering dimensions. The most amazing thing was how they managed to construct this monumental edifice in record time.
Justinian wanted something to go up immediately, and it went up quickly, very, very quickly. In less than 6 years, we have a major building constructed. If we think about Gothic cathedrals in France, for example, maybe the quickest construction would be something like Reims Cathedral, which only took 80 years and is a lot shorter and narrower than Hagia Sophia.
Despite this record speed, the interior decoration still matches the building's architectural ambition.
Justinian's Hagia Sophia is a spectacle in stone. To build his great church, Justinian brought marbles from all parts of the empire. The great purple columns come from the imperial quarries of Egypt. The porphyry stone signifies the imperial presence in Hagia Sophia. Elsewhere, we see stones brought from as far away as North Africa.
The tallest columns are over 20 meters high. Their capitals are sculpted in intricate detail, and each of these elements contributes to the symbolic impact of the whole.
The building becomes the empire of Justinian. Its marbles present a geography lesson of the extent and greatness of Justinian's empire. And above we have the heavens represented by the gold mosaics.
Mosaics became the leitmotif of Byzantine art. They were associated with the rise of the Christian faith and with the many churches constructed during the period, and truly flourished during Justinian's reign. The Basilica of San Vitale in Ravenna, Italy, was built a few years after Hagia Sophia. It's one of the only churches in the world to have preserved so many figurative mosaics from the Justinian period. They show just how this art form took on a new dimension during this period to become the signature of Byzantine Christianity.
The Romans had used mosaics on a wide scale, especially on the floor, but the Byzantine artist also uses mosaics to cover the walls, cover the ceilings, and so when Byzantine visitors entered the Church of San Vitale, they would be transported into an entirely different world.
Much more than simple decorations, these mosaics were designed to help spread the word about the Christian faith.
These art images conveyed biblical stories and theological messages through the visual medium. They become the Bible of the illiterate.
In Ravenna, far from the capital Constantinople, they also carried a political message. In San Vitale, Emperor Justinian and Empress Theodora are directly associated with these biblical scenes. This new use of mosaics as a vector for communication for imperial and religious power led to the development of new materials. A stone's throw from San Vitale, Luciana Notturni teaches the techniques and materials used back then.
This material, which we call a pizza, is a glass paste. Today it's made in Venice, but it used to be produced right here.
Depending on their needs, the artisans would break this coloured glass into small cubes of different dimensions called tessere.
Their colours are what make them special, because you cannot find these bright blues, greens and reds in natural materials.
But what particularly appealed to Byzantine artists and their patrons was the possibility of using gold or silver tesserae in their works.
They are small pieces of transparent glass upon which you place a thin piece of gold leaf, which is then covered with a very thin film of glass. The whole thing is then fired in the oven, and you end up with this material that reflects the light in a unique way. And it's very special because it really contains 24-karat gold. This material is used in mosaics when you want to show light, because gold isn't a colour, it's just light.
The purity of this symbol was perfect for the meaning Justinian wanted to give to his great church. Unlike in San Vitale, the decoration in Hagia Sophia had to be abstract, conceptual, and unique.
Hagia Sophia, we have 70 acres of gold mosaic, we have a lot of crosses, a lot of geometric designs, but we do not have an image of God the Father, we do not have the Virgin Mary, we do not have the standard features that we see in later Byzantine churches.
But even in this completely refined form, the message in the mosaics is perfectly legible.
This abundance of gold symbolizes light, and light is a metaphor for God, and God is represented on earth by the Emperor Justinian.
In 537, Justinian unveiled Hagia Sophia to the world. Its creation almost bankrupted the Byzantine Empire, but its effect was instant.
We know from historical accounts this was an incredible structure. It only took 5 years to build, so it wasn't there 5 years ago. Now, all of a sudden, this giant, monumental building stands at the center of Constantinople.
It came to be known as the Great Church because for the Byzantine Empire, conceived as the universal Christian empire, it was simply the center of the world. And for Justinian, it was a formidable setting to demonstrate his power.
For Justinian, Hagia Sophia was a great stage for imperial ceremony that would guarantee the order in the well-governed cosmos. Hagia Sophia was where church and state came together.
For the people who attended his ceremonies, their grandiose staging made for an almost mystical experience.
When one entered Hagia Sophia from the streets of Constantinople, it was as if the gates of heaven had been opened and you were walking into heaven itself. Hagia Sophia was transcendental. It was not of this world.
However, this state of grace would be short-lived. On May the 7th, 558, barely 20 years since it was consecrated, a series of earthquakes caused the extraordinary dome of Hagia Sophia to collapse.
The first dome was a grand experiment, and architecture in this period is really a process of trial and error. And although it made a great impression, it simply wasn't firm enough to withstand earth movements that are characteristic of Constantinople.
The dome that was then reconstructed by Isidore the Younger, the nephew of one of the two architects, is that which we see today. So why did the original dome collapse after barely 2 decades, while its replacement is still standing 1,500 years later?
Our descriptions of that dome give it a somewhat different appearance than the dome that was reconstructed to replace it. The first dome had a much lower profile. It was more or less bowl-shaped rather than fully semicircular.
Perhaps it was closer to the shape of the dome of Hagia Irene, a church constructed a few years before Hagia Sophia, an almost flat cupola sitting on a cylindrical drum pierced with high windows. Somewhat surprisingly, Isidore the Younger opted for an even higher and steeper shape. In fact, this choice made the structure even more coherent. While the force exerted by a dome with a shallower shape would tend to push out the arches supporting it, a higher shape would direct the pressure down through the pillars supporting the arches. The principle is so efficient that between the ribs channeling the force, Isidore the Younger was able to open 40 windows without weakening the structure, echoing the airy structure of the original dome. At 56 meters high and almost 80 meters long, Hagia Sophia would be the biggest covered space in the world until the completion of the Seville Cathedral almost 1,000 years later. But is the structure of Hagia Sophia still capable of supporting the weight of the dome if another earthquake strikes? At the Boråzici University, work on constructing the model continues. The arches and their abutments have been built, and the team has started on the semi-domes that will add even more support. The mortar has been drying now for several weeks, and it's time to remove the wooden mold that has been supporting them.
Shall we remove them?
Yep, let's do it.
But suddenly a large crack appears.
It's because of the slope of this curve.
I don't need your geometry. Are there other cracks?
Yeah, several.
With these cracks, the semi-dome will never be solid enough to withstand the seismic testing.
We can't use it for the test. It'll collapse immediately.
Eren asked the workers to break up the construction to examine in detail how the mortar behaved. Like the original dome of Hagia Sophia, the construction of this model is entirely experimental, forcing the team to carry out a series of tests.
Measure this piece. I think it's 3 centimeters.
We have 2 different dimensions, and 4 centimeter coming from that side and 4 centimeter coming from that side, but the failure part was too thin. It is almost a half centimeter.
Some shrinkage occurs after drying of the mortar. We may consider to play with the mortar properties, to improve it or to introduce some elements to the mortar so that its strength properties will improve.
In the Byzantine Empire, the collapse of the symbol of Justinian power was no doubt accepted less philosophically.
We really don't know what Justinian did when the first dome collapsed. We can imagine he wasn't very happy. Fortunately for Isidore and Anthemius, they were dead by that point. Ironically, just as the dome of Hagia Sophia is collapsing, the greater empire of Justinian is also collapsing.
Justinian wanted to rebuild the great Roman Empire to which he considered himself to be the heir, and he almost managed it. But from the second half of the 6th century onwards, the empire gradually started losing ground and would never regain the same dimensions. During the 7th and 8th centuries, the world was changing around the Christian empire of Constantinople. To the west, a Latin Christian empire, the Carolingian Empire, was gaining ground and also claiming the legacy of Rome with the support of the Pope. To the north, Slavs and Bulgars were maintaining constant pressure. But in the east and south, a conquering Islam was flourishing. Constantinople found itself acting as the frontier of Christianity. Faced with growing pressure from this new religion, Byzantine Christianity was in crisis. The adoration inspired by the religious imagery of monasteries and churches started being denounced by certain leaders as a form of idolatry. Interpreting their military setbacks as signs of divine disapproval, the emperors prohibited all figurative religious images and had them destroyed. This so-called iconoclastic crisis would last for more than a century, and the readoption of religious images wasn't definitively re-established until 843. Hagia Sophia and its non-figurative gold mosaics didn't suffer the consequences of this crisis. However, its end brought about a spectacular evolution in terms of its decoration.
Hagia Sophia was the billboard for the Byzantine Empire. It was the greatest advertising space you could possibly imagine. So it really became necessary to insert figural images into the building, basically to advertise official Orthodox policy in terms of state religion.
But the creation of figurative mosaics within an architecture such as that of Hagia Sophia is no easy task. Crafting the works that decorate the walls, domes and vaults of Byzantine churches involves a long and meticulous creative process. It all begins with the artist's design, sketched directly onto the wall to check that the balance and composition are adapted to the place where the work will be created.
There are some special rules that apply when you have to transpose a motif onto a wall. You have to consider the point of view and the proportions that are altered by curved surfaces.
You then apply a mixture of lime and powdered marble into which the tesserae are set.
It's laid down in small sections to the size that you think a person can finish in a day. So these were in fact called giornate, which means day in Italian.
The design is then sketched back onto the surface, but this time with an indication of the colours desired. Then the real work of the mosaic artist can begin.
Each tessera is pressed by hand, and therefore the inclination of the tessera will be different, which gives it a very irregular surface and a different reflection of light.
The artist's inspiration and talent lies as much in the interpretation of the design as in the positioning of each tessera.
It's through the angle of each piece that the mosaic comes to life and becomes animated.
In movimento. Positioning of the tessera was directly connected to the light and where the light was coming from, so where the windows were, where the main light sources were.
The time and effort required to make whole walls and ceilings defies imagination. It took Luciana around 10 days to create this motif.
È finito. It's long and costly work these days, and it was the same back then. So much so that creating mosaics could only be financed by emperors.
The problem, of course, is Hagia Sophia is so much bigger than every other Byzantine church that the act of simply adding a mosaic to the building is a really major undertaking. Think of the scaffolding necessary to put a new mosaic into the dome of the building. The Virgin Mary in the apse of the building is 15 feet, 5 meters tall, and yet she's dwarfed by the architectural space there. So decorating the building with figural images was a major undertaking. As a consequence, it doesn't happen all at once.
Over time, each emperor brought his own contribution and made Hagia Sophia a unique showcase for some of the greatest masterpieces of Byzantine art.
For the history of art, Hagia Sophia is extremely important. It is a place where a number of mosaics throughout different centuries are created, and so we have this sort of test case of mosaic making throughout the Byzantine period, all in one space.
This mosaic was added in the 10th century, 4 centuries after the death of Justinian. His great church still embodies the symbolic heart of Christianity. And Constantinople continued to dazzle the world. The capital of an ever-diminishing empire, this legendary city was now regularly besieged by the Muslims. It was the conflict between the Byzantine Church that would later become the Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church of Rome that would deal the empire a fatal blow.
The motivation for religious dispute between Catholics and Orthodox is very difficult for us to understand today. On a larger perspective, however, it's about power. Who is ultimately in charge of the Christian church? Is it the Pope in Rome, or is it the Patriarch in Constantinople?
In 1204, the Fourth Crusade left Venice and sacked Constantinople, establishing a Latin empire. For 60 years, the Crusaders pillaged the city's riches, including the gold from the mosaics in Hagia Sophia, a significant part of which was used to make the Basilica of San Marco the symbol of Venetian power. When the empire reclaimed its capital, it was in ruins. Yet, in a final burst of life, the Byzantine civilization would produce its most accomplished works of art over the following 2 centuries. The Church of the Holy Saviour in Cora is a spectacular example of this. But the most moving testimony of this swan song is found on the walls of Hagia Sophia. The Deesis is considered to be the ultimate masterpiece of Byzantine mosaic art. In the mid-15th century, the Byzantine Empire was reduced to the areas immediately surrounding Constantinople and the Peloponnesus. Around it, the burgeoning Ottoman Empire already occupied all of Anatolia and a large part of the Balkans. Despite calls for help, the Christian West did not come to its aid. On May 29, 1453, after 2 months of siege, Sultan Mehmet II's troops entered Constantinople. It was the end of the Byzantine Empire. This marked the start of a new chapter in the history of Hagia Sophia. The basilica was already almost 900 years old. It still stood proudly overlooking Constantinople, but then as now, it needed to be maintained. Sonay Sakar is an architect and is managing the current program of building maintenance.
Maintenance and repair are always necessary in Hagia Sophia. This work has to continue as long as the Hagia Sophia stands. You should be worried if you don't see maintenance and repairs in the Hagia Sophia.
But certain attempts at consolidation have sometimes upset the balance upon which the building's survival rests. During the 1950s, a thick layer of quick-drying cement was used to reinforce this wall. This cement hasn't withstood the movement of the building and has become brittle.
The cement has fallen down, taking some bricks with it, and causing some major deformations in this wall.
This intervention thus worsened the situation, and if there was an earthquake today, there's a good chance this wall would collapse.
So we have to remove all the cement remaining on these walls.
They're keeping the original bricks, which are amazingly well preserved, and are replacing the cement with fresh mortar. But to avoid similar mistakes, it won't be just any old mortar.
The general principle governing our restoration projects is using traditional supplies and methods. The mortar that you see was developed in a laboratory after analyzing a sample of the original mortar taken from Hagia Sophia.
For centuries, legend had it that Hagia Sophia owes its resistance to the relics of the saints and pieces of the true cross built into its walls. But analysis of the mortar in Istanbul's conservation laboratory has revealed a more rational explanation. An original sample from the 6th century was sliced up, crushed and shaken. It then underwent copious testing. As with the majority of ancient mortars, its main ingredients have turned out to be lime and water. But in the mortar used in Hagia Sophia, there are also fragments of brick, and this brick dust is the key to its strength.
I can show a small piece here. It has brick inside, which is creating the chemical bonding with the lime.
These brick fragments contain volcanic ash and calcium carbonate, elements that create a very strong yet very flexible bond with the classic mortar mixture. This chemical reaction results in a mortar we call pozzolanic mortar, after volcanic rock. And it's these qualities that have contributed to the strength of Hagia Sophia.
The mortar in Hagia Sophia has a very high elasticity. We can say that it works like wood to a certain extent.
So by using this ancient formula for mortar, the restoration team are doing much more than simply fixing up the building's appearance. They're also making it as resistant to earthquakes as it used to be. But to do that, they must respect another peculiarity of the walls of Hagia Sophia.
Hagia Sophia differs from other structures in that the layer of mortar is thicker than the bricks. The bricks in Hagia Sophia also show pozzolanic attributes. Because of these pozzolanic attributes, the adhesion between the brick and the mortar is really high, allowing them to move together. Since the brick and the mortar we find here are very light, the masonry surfaces are also light and have very high elasticity. In other words, the wall structure, which contains a highly adhesive mortar-brick combination, adapts to the structural deformations caused by earthquakes.
In the seismic laboratory of Boğaziçi University, the problems with the mortar have also been resolved, enabling the team to reconstruct the semi-domes for their model. But the experiment has shown that they needed to adopt a different solution for the main dome.
We came to the conclusion that having a brick dome is much easier to construct and it's more realistic. This enabled us to construct those windows, which we see at the drum of Hagia Sophia as well. So it was much more similar to the original dome.
Before the testing can begin, they still need to move this enormous model weighing over 7 tons onto the seismic table.
This is the largest model ever to be made in our lab. We need to be very careful that during lift up, everything should be perfectly horizontal. Otherwise, we may damage the model.
If there was an accident now, months of work would be lost. The construction is so heavy that it makes the steel plate supporting it bend. This puts a dangerous strain on the structure. But it's eventually placed on the vibrating table with no apparent damage. The wooden formwork is gradually removed, and Esa Chakti checks every centimetre of the construction for cracks.
We have observed some cracks on the semidomes, but we don't see them from outside. These are just interior cracks.
Fortunately, these fissures are superficial and shouldn't compromise the structure's integrity. The next stage consists of installing sensors in the same places as those which have been measuring the movement of the real Hagia Sophia in the last 20 years.
We'll be able to compare the vibrations that we record during the shake table test with those obtained from the real structure.
It's this comparison with how the model behaves that will allow them to project what might happen to Hagia Sophia during an earthquake. Its structure is so unique and its dimensions so spectacular that nobody really knows what might happen if one of its main elements reaches breaking point. But it's also the unique character of this architectural symbol that dazzled the Ottomans when they seized Constantinople.
For Mehmet the Conqueror, Hagia Sophia was really the ultimate conquest. That was the symbol he was after for his new empire. And his first official act was to convert Hagia Sophia into a mosque.
But how could this building, designed to embody Christianity, be transformed into a mosque?
From an architectural perspective, it wasn't difficult to transform Hagia Sophia from a Christian sacred space into a Muslim sacred space, a mosque. There was the addition of the minbar, the place from which the imam would give the sermon. There was also the addition of the mihrab, which gave us the sacred direction to Mecca. The dome itself was a symbol in both religions for the celestial sphere, the heavens.
A first minaret was immediately constructed. Hagia Sophia was now a mosque called Hagia Sophia. But initially, the Ottomans did little to modify the building. For Robert Oosterhout, the reason was once again symbolic.
For the early Ottoman period, Hagia Sophia stood both as a functioning mosque and a symbol of triumph. It was necessary for it to still look like it had been a church. One walking into Hagia Sophia would see a building that used to be a church and was no longer. That was part of the message in the early Ottoman period.
This desire to appropriate the Byzantine heritage was all the more natural given that Mehmet made Constantinople the capital of his empire and ordered the construction of the Topkapi Palace near Hagia Sophia, which thus became the Mosque of the Sultans. For Erwin Cemilsik, a specialist in Ottoman culture who works at the University of Istanbul Sehir, beyond its symbolic dimension, it was the architecture of the building that so fascinated the Ottomans.
If you look at the mosques that were built prior to the conquest of Istanbul, let's say that the architectural technology was not quite as advanced, and so they had very, very many columns holding many little domes, and so the space does not have the grandeur that this building has. So for that reason also, this building must have looked to them like an amazing, completely different building, something that they would want to emulate.
Just like Justinian 9 centuries before, Mehmet the Conqueror embarked upon a major program of reconstruction for his new capital, and Hagia Sophia became the model for the construction of its mosques.
We suddenly see mosques built on a large scale, following the model of Hagia Sophia. The first great mosque to be built following the model of Hagia Sophia is in fact Mehmet's mosque, the Fatih Jami, where he situates his own tomb on the site where Justinian and Constantine had their tombs.
This admiration for the architecture of Hagia Sophia reached its climax in the 16th century with Mimar Sinan, the official architect of Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent.
Mimar Sinan the architect, as he's known, is undoubtedly the most important Ottoman architect. It is difficult to think of too many individuals who are responsible for so many major constructions. And when I say constructions, they range from bridges to baths to mosques to just about everything. But you could maybe compare him to a genius like Michelangelo or somebody like that.
Sinan was fascinated by the formal purity of Hagia Sophia and the audacity of its Byzantine creators in terms of its structure. Worried about the deformations he noticed on this building that was over 1,000 years old, he strengthened it with an impressive series of new buttresses that give it the massive external appearance we see today.
It is very likely that without them the building would have collapsed a long time ago. So his contribution to Hagia Sophia is very, very crucial. But in addition to that, he has built an enormous number of mosques as well as various other buildings. It's difficult to imagine Istanbul without him.
Throughout his long career, Sinan would attempt to rival what he considered to be a total masterpiece. The Süleymaniye Mosque, which he constructed for Suleiman the Magnificent, was one of his most successful attempts. Almost 1,000 years after the model it's based upon was created, it is Ottoman architecture's answer and homage to Byzantine genius.
With Süleymaniye, he managed to create a space which was probably as grandiose as Sophia. He was able to give this almost divine sense of space that Hagia Sophia had.
At the same time, Hagia Sophia, now the mosque of the Ottoman sultans, was gradually becoming Islamicized. Over the centuries, other minarets were added and some masterpieces of the great Islamic art of calligraphy started to appear.
The dome is done by a 19th century calligrapher by the name of Kazasker Mustafa İzzet Efendi. And this particular verse is the verse of light, and it starts with God is the light of the heavens and the earth. The verse, interestingly enough, is not complete. Frankly, he couldn't fit it. After all, when you write that verse, it is not so that people will read it from beginning to end. It is so that it will protect the building and protect the congregation. And in that sense, of course, it has done its job for a long time.
Calligraphy is one of the most emblematic art forms of the Ottoman civilization. One of Turkey's greatest contemporary calligraphers, Savas teaches this art to a handful of students in his workshop on the Asian bank of the Bosphorus.
Islamic calligraphy in particular is a result of the imperative for Muslims to preserve the word of God in the most beautiful possible form. It is actually a very, very highly developed, very sophisticated art form.
Şuradaki hareketi görüyorsun.
It has very firm rules, but these rules do not mean that there isn't room for tremendous variability and tremendous creativity at the same time.
Gerekli değil ama
No, it's not necessary to be religious, but most people who are calligraphers tend to be religious because most of the time the texts you end up writing tend to be religious texts, and therefore, for you to have the proper feeling, chances are you would be religious. On the other hand, I have a good friend, an Iraqi calligrapher who is Christian and an excellent calligrapher, so you don't have to be Muslim necessarily.
The sophistication and purity of the works of Ottoman artists is unanimously acknowledged, and it's in architectural compositions that it is expressed in the most spectacular manner. The exceptional volume of Hagia Sophia represented a challenge that was brilliantly met by the Ottoman master calligraphers. The 8 giant medallions that punctuate the building are perhaps the most emblematic example.
They are 7.5 meters in diameter, which is probably the largest Islamic inscription anywhere. And I can see why, for somebody who just sees this building for the first time, these may seem like invaders. But if you've been born and raised here, this calligraphy is synonymous with this building. I mean, it is very difficult for me to imagine Hagia Sophia without the calligraphy.
But in parallel to these additions, the decoration of the walls of the Mosque of Hagia Sophia raised a tricky question.
There are several sayings and doings attributed to the Prophet Muhammad that make it very clear that you do not want pictures in a place where you pray.
So the Byzantine mosaics theoretically presented a problem. Yet several centuries would pass before religious imperatives took precedence over the admiration inspired by these works.
The mosaics of Hagia Sophia were left exposed when the building was converted to a mosque. And our earliest illustrations by Western visitors looking at Hagia Sophia show the mosaics still in place. The image of the Virgin in the apse was left until sometime in the 18th century. Now, in the 18th century, we see a more conservative version of Islam coming to the fore. And at that point, we see the complete coverage of the mosaics, the figural mosaics inside the building.
The Byzantine masterpieces then completely disappeared from the walls of Hagia Sophia, and their existence was gradually forgotten. After the conquest of Constantinople, the Ottoman Empire gradually established its sovereignty over a huge area. But in the 18th century, it too began to decline, and during the 19th century, it was nicknamed the sick man of Europe and rapidly lost prestige and territory. Further seismic activity damaged the Mosque of Hagia Sophia, and by 1847, it was, like the empire, in a terrible state. It needed to be restored and consolidated once again. Sultan Abdulmecid gave the job to Swiss architect Gaspare Fossati. Carlo Aliati is the curator of Fossati's papers in the Tessin Cantonal Archives in Bellinzona, Switzerland.
The basilica was in a deplorable state, particularly in terms of its structure. There are witness accounts from the time that describe large holes in the central dome and cracks so big that a man could pass through them.
Fossati strengthened the structure of the dome and redecorated the interior. The colours you see on the walls of Hagia Sophia today date from his reconstruction. But this also brought about an extraordinary discovery.
Fossati's great discovery during this restoration work was that he uncovered the extraordinary mosaics from the Byzantine era in the vaults, the cupola, the narthex, and all the other parts of the structure hidden underneath the plaster.
Protected from earthquakes and deterioration by this Ottoman plaster, the mosaics reappeared in all their splendor.
Fossati was keen to keep track of these significant finds from the Byzantine era, and he documented them.
Fossati had to work very fast. He obtained the agreement of the young Sultan Abdülmecid, but faced strong pressure from religious figures in the declining Ottoman Empire.
And there was some discussion at that time about leaving them exposed then, but the Fossati brothers noticed that the workers were defacing the images, so they realized this was probably not the right time for exposing the images. So they recorded them very quickly and then covered them up again.
The mosaics disappeared once again, and Hagia Sophia took on again its identity as a mosque. The First World War precipitated the end of the Ottoman Empire. After fighting alongside the Germans, the empire was taken apart by the Allies at the end of the conflict. In a spurt of nationalist pride, former soldiers came together behind Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, drove the Europeans out of Anatolia, and proclaimed the birth of the Turkish Republic in 1923. The Ottoman Empire was no more, and for Hagia Sophia, the third chapter in its history was beginning. Atatürk's new republic wanted to mark its secularity, and did so with the symbolic act of deconsecrating the Hagia Sophia Mosque and turning it into a museum.
This happened at the time when Ataturk was proclaimed Ataturk, father of his people. The same day that he was proclaimed Ataturk, Hagia Sophia was opened as a museum. So we can see the secularization of the building, something that stands as a symbol of the Turkish Republic.
Ataturk immediately brought in Thomas Whitmore and the Byzantine Institute of America to embark upon a new maintenance program for the building, which was in desperate need. But this time, one of the aims was also to remove the Ottoman plaster and reveal the Byzantine mosaics that had been catalogued by Fossati. This was the moment when the majority of the masterpieces on show today were revealed and painstakingly restored. Their reappearance triggered a new interest in the history of the Byzantine period, and Hagia Sophia's dual nature was again highlighted.
Right up there, above the mihrab, as you can see, there are two large calligraphic medallions, and in between there is a wonderful work in mosaics. The large medallions, the one on the right, says Allah Jalla Jalaluhu, which means God, may His glory be glorified. The one on the left says Muhammad alayhi salam, which means Muhammad, may peace be upon him. Obviously, these two are highly symbolic of Islam. And right in the middle is a wonderful work in mosaics showing the Virgin Mary and baby Jesus. And so, to me, this combination of Islam and Christianity is very, very symbolic of Istanbul, past and present.
However, this situation also raises questions for today's restorers.
Restoration at Hagia Sophia is a very tricky and challenging thing to do. It is rich with a history of Christianity in the Eastern Empire, And also it has been a mosque and a central place for Islamic worship in the Muslim world. And today, of course, it is a museum. So the question for the restorer is always, what do we restore to? How do we see Hagia Sophia through these many different layers throughout the ages?
This question is all the more sensitive as there are almost certainly further mosaics under the Ottoman plaster. It's even possible that these include figurative works because some of Fossati's drawings portray images that are not currently visible. If this is the case, nobody knows where exactly they're located, and there is no question of destroying all the Ottoman decorations of Hagia Sophia to find them. Hitoshi Takanazawa from the University of Kobe in Japan has perhaps found a way out of this impasse.
We are developing new equipment for investigation. It's crucial we find a technology that can deduce whether a mosaic exists without destroying anything.
To search the walls of Hagia Sophia without damaging the surface, Hitoshi is using an electromagnetic scanner that's normally used for detecting faults in construction such as bridges and skyscrapers. But first, he has to prove that this novel approach will work. To do that, he focuses his attention on areas where the plaster has already been removed, revealing the presence of coloured tesserae.
We are sure there is a mosaic under the plaster with a geometric pattern or maybe a plant pattern.
If the mosaic continues under the plaster, and if the procedure works, it should allow him to get an image of the motive it represents. The scanner sends electromagnetic images to different depths under the plaster. When a wave meets a metal surface, it bounces back. That way you can reconstruct an echo of the metallic elements hidden within the wall. And Hitoshi is counting on the taste of Byzantine artists for tesserae made from gold and silver.
That design is made by metallic tesserae, so we hope to find geometric patterns with our instruments. We've scanned it 5 times, and this green area shows the presence of metallic tesserae. So here we can see a circular motif that is clearly a shape drawn by a human hand.
Encouraged by these results, Hitoshi is heading towards the highest part of Hagia Sophia, a narrow balcony that runs alongside the drum, just at the base of the main arches. The whole upper part of the building was once covered with mosaics, so choosing where a figurative work might be hidden is no easy task.
It's very difficult to decide where we do the research because this space is enormous in size, so I have to guess. Originally, this niche, this side, was decorated with figures of saints or archbishops, like on the other side.
Archbishop, like another part.
On the other side, the niche in the north wall are filled with figurative mosaics, and Fossati's drawings indicate the presence of similar motifs on this side. But have these works survived?
We found some reflections under the plaster, so it means some metallic material is behind the plaster.
It's behind the plaster.
And we think it should probably be the remains of the mosaics with 70% certainty.
70% confidence.
Hitoshi is not the only person scanning the walls of Hagia Sophia. The restoration team is using similar technology. Although the flexibility of the mortar used in Hagia Sophia helps the building stand up to earthquakes, it also has some more problematic consequences.
Now we say that the mortar in Hagia Sophia shows hydraulic attributes and feeds off moisture. And this is a significant amount of moisture. This moisture damages the mosaic, plaster and stone surfaces in the interior. We have recently started repairing the deformation caused by the moisture and material fatigue in the surfaces. Currently, we're in the first stage of this work.
Before any interventions can take place, just like the teams of Whitmore and Fossati before them, the restorers must document every inch of the building. The difference is that today they can use technologies such as laser scanners. At the same time, engineers are exploring the interiors of the walls looking for water damage or other hidden problems. Although they're not specifically looking for them, it's always possible that, like Fossati, they too might come across some more hidden figurative mosaics.
I have not come across any mosaics under plaster yet. We'll see what's under there and what's not during the application process of the repair work. I know that there are records of such mosaics in Fossati's restoration. However, I haven't come across anything like that yet, but they certainly exist.
The walls of Hagia Sophia seem to guard their secrets jealously. During his examinations, Hitoshi has yet to discover any hidden treasure. A detailed analysis of the echoes detected on the ledge has revealed that there are no hidden mosaics there.
We did a scan, and we got some reactions. But it seems they weren't caused by mosaics, rather by metal frameworks used in the construction. They were just horizontal lines, which led us to conclude that they weren't mosaics.
As for the other area that was meant to validate the efficiency of the tool, although he was able to definitely establish that the mosaic continued under the plaster, the machine's lack of precision prevented him from establishing the design of the mosaic. That's why Hitoshi has come to consult Fossati's archives to see if there is a sketch of this shape among his unpublished drawings that might help him interpret his results. He's unsuccessful once again, but Hitoshi isn't discouraged.
We have a sketch of Fossati's of a circular mosaic, but its possible location is still under debate.
This sketch clearly shows a figure of the glory of Christ, or Christ Pantocrator, that one often sees represented in the top of domes in Byzantine churches. And Hitoshi thinks he knows where he might find it.
I think the presence of a large representation of the face of Christ at the top of the Great Dome of Hagia Sophia is a really plausible hypothesis. It is currently covered with plaster and Islamic calligraphy, but one day, with our scanner, we might reveal this mosaic. That's my dream.
But what could be done if his dream comes true?
I think if there are any more mosaics that we don't know about in Hagia Sophia, certainly they should be brought to light. The only exception that I would hold would be if they happen to be, for example, behind something that was added later. For instance, it's very, very likely that there were mosaics on the dome. But the dome has a magnificent piece of calligraphy. Basically, maybe an analogy might be the following. Consider a Byzantine icon, and let us say that Rembrandt happened to paint something over it. It happened that painters would use an old canvas or an old board. Now, would you remove the Rembrandt in order to recover the icon? Probably not.
However, this question only makes sense if the building is in any kind of condition to withstand the next major earthquake to hit Istanbul. In the seismic laboratory, at last everything is ready for the test. The vibrating table has been calibrated to simulate the impact of a quake measuring 7.4, like the one that devastated the city in 1999. The duration of the tremor has been reduced to 3 seconds to correspond to the reduced proportions of the model. The model has stood up to this first test so well that the engineers decide to carry out another, more powerful one.
We are increasing the amplitude of our earthquake one more step, so that now we aim 2.2 G.
So 2 was the maximum. Are we going more than 2, huh?
If we can do it, we'll go for 2.4.
If transposed to the scale of the real Hagia Sophia, the next movement would correspond to an earthquake more powerful than has ever been recorded in the Istanbul region.
I see one new crack in this arch. But surprisingly, there is nothing new with the semidomes. We were afraid about them, but they are as they have been before.
In fact, no critical elements of the building have really been damaged, which is very reassuring for the future of Hagia Sophia. But to reveal where the weaknesses lie in the structure, the team has to push the experiment to its limits.
We have passed the known capacity of our shake table, and then it appears the mechanics have allowed us to go further.
Now all the available power will be used, and this will be repeated. The question is no longer about knowing what kinds of quakes Hagia Sophia can withstand, rather, where are the weak points in its construction? Because even though it's on the verge of collapse, it's still standing.
There are two vulnerable parts, the semidomes and then the arches. It is just a matter of time to see which one will go first.
While everyone monitors the collapse of the semi-domes and the arches, nobody anticipates what happens next. The slow-motion film reveals that semi-domes ended up coming apart from the rest of the structure, and deprived of their supporting structures, the main arches pulled apart, leading to the dome's collapse. It's too soon to draw any definitive conclusions, but the experiment has shown that miracles had no hand in the survival of Hagia Sophia.
If there's a miracle, it is in its design. Everything that make up the main structural system behave in harmony. They wanted the building to survive ages. For that, they had the best people, best materials. The thing, I believe, was designed with care and then with earthquakes in mind. So all these factors danced together to make a building which indeed survived all these ages and which will remain so for many, many, many more years.
Conceived in the 6th century to embody a message to be delivered to the world, there's a good chance that this imposing construction will look down over the old town of Istanbul for many years to come. But earthquakes of a different kind are now threatening Hagia Sophia. Faced with the desire of current Turkish leaders to break with Ataturk's secular ideals and to restore religion to a key place in running this country, part of the population is resisting. And the future of Hagia Sophia is a hostage to this conflict. 1,500 years after its creation, its symbolic value is still just as strong, and official declarations regarding the necessity of returning it to a mosque are growing.
In many ways, Hagia Sophia could be said to represent today's tensions. I think that the people who want Hagia Sophia to be a mosque tend to belong to a certain part of the political spectrum. Those, like myself, who want it to remain a museum tend to belong to the opposite side of the political spectrum.
I suppose today we could see Hagia Sophia as a symbol of the rich multicultural history of Turkey. That is, it's not a building that belongs to one particular ethnic or religious group, but a building that really symbolizes the entire rich history of the country.
If Hagia Sophia has managed to stay standing until our era, it's also because despite their political, cultural or religious differences, successive civilizations at this frontier between Europe and Asia have always respected and maintained it. And for the historians and restorers who are currently working on the monument, the challenge of preserving this unique construction is beyond current political conflicts.
Hagia Sophia has an identity of its own. We don't think of Hagia Sophia through the functions that people have assigned it. Our only goal here is to ensure that we can carry it down to the next generations. As an architect, I think that it is a monumental building. It's a special building. Our goal is to pass it down to the next generations with its present silhouette, inside and outside.